There is a kind of pain that does not scream. It settles quietly inside your relationships, your choices, your body, your silences. You call it anxiety, overthinking, fear of abandonment, difficulty trusting, the habit of loving people who cannot love you back. But what if none of that is where the story truly begins? What if the wound you keep trying to heal in romance, friendship, and self-worth was shaped much earlier, in the first emotional world you ever entered? The truth is difficult, and most people spend years avoiding it because it feels too personal, too disloyal, too dangerous to name. But no real healing begins until you are willing to see it. The way your mother related to your emotions may have taught you what love feels like, what safety feels like, what closeness costs, and whether your needs were welcome or too much. This is not about blaming her. It is about finally understanding the invisible pattern that may still be running your life. Because if your earliest bond taught you to earn love, fear, intimacy, or abandon yourself to stay connected, then your adult relationships were never random. And until you face that truth, you may keep repeating the same pain while calling it fate. Maybe this is why you have spent so much of your life feeling things you could never fully explain. You may have learned to read every shift in someone's tone before you even knew what your own feelings were. You may have become the one who adjusts, the one who understands, the one who forgives too much, waits too long, and asks for too little. And from the outside, people may even call you strong, mature, independent, but deep down, love may have never felt simple to you. It may have felt uncertain, conditional, easy to lose. So when someone pulls away, something ancient wakes up in you. When someone gets too close, something in you tenses. When you are ignored, criticized, misunderstood, or emotionally left alone, your reaction may feel bigger than the moment itself. Not because you are dramatic, not because you are weak, but because some part of you is not reacting only to the present. It is reacting to a much older emotional memory. You may find yourself craving reassurance, and then feeling ashamed for needing it. You may give endlessly, hoping to feel chosen, yet still carry the quiet belief that if people truly saw your needs, they might leave. You may confuse emotional inconsistency with chemistry. You may feel drawn to people you must earn, convince, rescue, or wait for. And when love is calm, available, and clear, it may even feel unfamiliar. If any of this feels painfully close to your own life, there is nothing strange about you. There is a reason your heart learned these patterns. There is a reason closeness can feel both necessary and dangerous at the same time. And before we can talk about healing, we have to honor this first. A part of you adapted to survive emotionally. A part of you learned these patterns for a reason. That part is not broken. It is carrying a history your mind may have forgotten, but your relationships still remember. The deepest wound is not simply that your mother may have failed you in certain moments. It is that, as a child, you had no choice but to build your identity around whatever love felt like in her presence. If love came with tension, you learned to tense before speaking. If love came with criticism, you learned to watch yourself before anyone else could reject you. If love came with emotional absence, you learned to need less, feel less, expect less. And if love came only when you were pleasing, quiet, helpful, or easy, then you may have slowly disappeared from yourself just to remain connected. This is the pain beneath the pain. You were not only hurt, you were shaped. Your nervous system adapted. Your emotions adapted. Even your sense of self adapted. You may have learned that being fully honest was risky. That having needs created distance. That expressing anger made you unlovable. That sadness was inconvenient. That joy was too loud. So instead of developing naturally, you developed strategically. You became who you had to be in order to preserve the bond. And this is why the problem follows you into adulthood with such force. Because it is not just a memory. It is an internal structure. It is the voice that tells you not to ask for too much. The guilt that appears when you set a boundary. The panic that rises when someone changes their tone. The exhaustion of constantly monitoring how you are being received. The tendency to over-explain, over-give, over-function, and still fear that it will never be enough. Many people think their suffering comes from choosing the wrong partners or repeating bad habits, but often the real issue is more hidden than that. You are not simply choosing from freedom, you are choosing from programming. Some part of you is still trying to solve the original wound by recreating it in different forms, hoping this time it will end differently. That is why the pain feels so personal, so repetitive, so hard to break. It is not just about who hurt you. It is about the version of you that was built in order to survive being hurt. Carl Jung believed that the mother is not only a person in our biography, she is the first psychological environment we ever know. Before you had language, before you had beliefs, before you had a clear sense of who you were already learning something through her presence. Whether the world felt safe, whether your feelings could be held, whether love was steady or unpredictable, whether your existence felt welcome or burdensome. In that sense, the mother becomes the child's first living experience of emotional reality itself. This is why the impact goes so deep. A child does not interpret the mother with adult logic. The child absorbs her emotionally. If she is warm, available, and attuned, the child begins to internalize a sense of safety. But if she is cold, intrusive, unstable, rejecting, or emotionally absent, the child does not simply think, "My mother is struggling." The child unconsciously concludes, "Something about my needs, my feelings, or my very being is too much, not enough, or unsafe to express." That conclusion rarely remains conscious. It sinks below the surface and becomes part of the personality. Later, the adult may say, "This is just how I am. I attach too quickly. I shut down. I fear abandonment. I don't trust easily." But Jung would suggest that many of these patterns are not your essence. They are adaptations built around an early emotional imprint. They are ways the psyche organized itself around the first experience of closeness. And this is what makes the mother wound so powerful. It does not live only in memory. It lives in expectation. It shapes what you anticipate from intimacy, what you tolerate in love, what you fear in connection, and what feels normal even when it hurts. So when your adult relationships begin to unravel you, they may not be creating the wound. They may be activating a psychological reality that was formed long before you knew how to name it. And this is where the pattern becomes even more revealing. Because the wound does not stay limited to how you remember your mother. It begins to organize the kinds of people you feel drawn to, the roles you take on in relationships, and even the emotional atmosphere that feels familiar enough to call love. You may say you want peace, consistency, and safety, yet feel magnetized toward distance, unpredictability, or emotional complexity. Why? Because the nervous system often mistakes familiarity for connection. What hurt you first can begin to feel strangely recognizable, and what is recognizable can feel like home. This is why some people spend years chasing those who remain just out of reach, not because they enjoy suffering, but because some hidden part of them is still trying to win a love that once felt uncertain. Others do the opposite. They withdraw before attachment deepens, become self-contained, emotionally unavailable, or hard to read. But the root can be the same. One person clings to avoid abandonment, another detaches to avoid needing. Different strategies, same original fear. And then there is another layer. Sometimes the wound does not only shape who you choose, it shapes who you become around them. You become the caretaker, the peacekeeper, the one who senses everything before it is spoken, the one who over-explains, overcorrects. You try to maintain harmony not because harmony is healthy, but because disharmony once felt dangerous. You learned that connection could disappear quickly. So now you monitor every shift, every silence, every glance, as if love could collapse at any moment. But here is the deeper question. What happens when someone actually offers the very thing you thought you wanted? What happens when love is steady, available, and emotionally clear? For many people with this wound, that is when discomfort begins. Calm can feel unfamiliar. Kindness can feel suspicious. Stability can feel boring. Not because you do not want love, but because your system has been trained to associate love with emotional effort. If you do not have to earn it, prove yourself, or fight for it, part of you may not know how to receive it. And that leads to one of the hardest truths of all. Sometimes, you are not only repeating the pain you experienced, you are repeating the emotional logic that pain taught you. You are reliving a pattern your conscious mind may reject, but your inner world still recognizes. Which means the real question is no longer just who you love, but what your heart learned to call love in the first place. But this is the moment where your story must be seen differently. Because if you only look at these patterns from the surface, you may end up judging yourself for the very strategies that once helped you survive. You call yourself too needy, too guarded, too sensitive, too attached, too distant. You think your reactions are proof that something is wrong with you. But many of these responses were not signs of weakness. They were forms of intelligence. Emotional intelligence built under pressure. Adaptations created by a child who was trying to stay connected, stay safe, and make sense of love in the only way they could. If you learned to please, it may have been because harmony protected you. If you learned to hide your needs, it may have been because expressing them brought disappointment or disconnection. If you became hyper-aware of other people's moods, it may have been because reading the emotional climate helped you avoid pain. If you shut down when things became too intimate, it may have been because closeness once came with confusion, guilt, or emotional risk. None of this means the pattern is healthy now, but it does mean it had a reason. And that changes everything, because healing becomes much harder when it begins with Real change starts when you stop treating your wounded patterns as personal failures and start recognizing them as old survival codes that were never updated. You are not weak because you learned to protect yourself. You are not broken because your heart organized itself around instability. You are someone who adapted early, deeply, and intelligently. The tragedy is not that you developed these patterns. The tragedy is that you may have spent years blaming yourself for them. And once you see that clearly, something softens. Not the pain itself, not yet, but the war you have been fighting against your own history. So the wound continues, not only in the people you choose, but in the smallest moments no one else sees. It lives in a hesitation before you send the message, in the shame that appears after you reveal a need, in the way you replay conversations, searching for the exact second you became too much, too emotional, too difficult, too visible. It lives in the apology that rises before your truth does, in the instinct to make yourself easier to love by becoming easier to ignore. You may feel guilty when someone cares for you sincerely, as if receiving is a burden you have not earned. You may crave closeness and then feel trapped by it the moment it becomes real. You may want to be chosen, yet distrust anyone who chooses you freely. You may long to rest in love, but when love arrives without confusion, pursuit, or struggle, something inside you remains unconvinced. It waits for the shift, the withdrawal, the disappointment, the moment warmth turns cold. And because this pattern is old, it often hides behind normality. It can look like high standards, independence, maturity, being low maintenance, being the strong one, being the one who understands everyone else. But underneath all of that, there may still be a child who learned that love required self-erasure, a child who learned that being deeply felt did not guarantee being deeply held. That is why the pain can feel so relentless. Not because the past is still happening, but because some part of you is still living as if it might. You still monitor, brace, adapt, and anticipate. You still prepare for emotional loss before it has even arrived. And over time, this becomes exhausting in a way that is hard to explain. You are tired not only from what you have been through, but from who you had to become in order to survive it. And maybe that is the deepest grief of all, realizing that for years, you were not only trying to be loved, you were trying not to be left the way your heart once was. The first step is not to fix everything. It is to interrupt the pattern in the moment it begins. The next time you feel the familiar wave rise inside you, the fear, the urgency, the need to chase, explain, withdraw, or earn back connection, do not move immediately. Pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself a different question than the one you usually ask. Not, how do I make this person stay? Not, what did I do wrong? But, what is being activated in me right now? That question matters because it begins to separate the present moment from the original wound. It reminds you that not every emotional reaction is a current truth. Some are echoes. Some belong to a younger part of you that learned to expect loss, distance, or rejection before they even happened. Then do something simple but powerful. Place a hand on your chest and breathe slowly enough to feel your body return. Not to force calm, just to signal safety. Let your body feel that you do not have to abandon yourself the moment someone becomes uncertain. Let yourself stay present without immediately turning pain into action. This will not heal everything at once, but it begins something essential. It teaches your system that fear does not always need to become pursuit, silence, or self-betrayal. Sometimes healing begins with staying with yourself long enough not to disappear, but sooner or later, healing asks for an even harder truth. Your mother may no longer be the one speaking, yet her imprint may still be living inside your mind as your own voice. It appears in the instant self-doubt after you express a feeling, in the inner criticism that tells you are too sensitive, too needy, too much, in the reflex to question your reality before trusting it, in the guilt that comes when you disappoint someone, even slightly, as if your worth still depends on keeping others comfortable. This is how the wound survives across time. It stops looking like a relationship with her and starts feeling like your personality. You think, this is just who I am, but often it is not your essence speaking. It is an internalized authority built from years of adaptation, a voice shaped by what love rewarded and what it punished. And that is why understanding the past is not enough. You must begin to notice the mother wound where it lives now, in your self-talk. Your choices, your fear, your automatic obedience to emotional patterns that were formed long ago. The real shift begins when you stop confusing that inherited voice with your true self. No healing truly begins until this truth is faced with honesty. The way you were first loved may still be shaping the way you suffer, attach, protect yourself, and search for connection today. Not to imprison you in the past, but to free you from repeating it without knowing. To see this clearly is not an act of betrayal, it is an act of maturity. It is the moment you stop calling your patterns fate, chemistry, bad luck, or personality, and begin recognizing them as the emotional inheritance of a wound that was never fully understood. And maybe that is where healing quietly starts. Not in blaming your mother, not in erasing what happened, but in refusing to let an old pain keep writing the script of your relationships. In learning, little by little, to stay with yourself where you once disappeared, to tell the truth where you once adapted, to bring compassion where you once brought shame. Because the moment you see the pattern, you are no longer fully inside it. And sometimes, that is the first real return to yourself.